Ukrainians have been given some of these printers. They're not quite at the stage where they could move these printers to the front line quickly. The British have managed to adapt these printers to make them more accessible for the military. However, the Ukrainians have got them, and they are using them to produce basic components that they will need. So yeah, they're already in use.
Well, The Times has an exclusive story today. In a world first, the British Army has adapted 3D printing technology to rapidly repair damaged and ageing military vehicles by printing new parts on the front line. Here to tell us more, delighted to be joined by The Times' defence editor, Larisa Brown. Hi, Larisa.
Hello.
Just help us get a sense of the technology we're talking about. Is this essentially a massive 3D printer?
Well, we saw a couple of different pieces of kit, and it was all sort of held in these ISO containers. And on the one hand, they've got this printer that prints plastic components, and the main showcase piece that we were looking at whilst I was in Germany this week was a printer that can print metal components. And that essentially was this huge robotic arm that was twisting and turning to help to create the piece. And it was also, you also saw some like aluminium fine powder that was travelling at 3 times the speed of sound being shot down this nozzle to also sort of start the process going. So it was quite complex, but fascinating to watch.
And I suppose there are two main benefits. First of all, the speed of repairs, but also some of these vehicles, there aren't replacement parts even being manufactured anymore. So this is where the technology comes into its own.
Yes, and that's what I found really interesting about this. So we spoke to this commanding officer there, and he was telling us that he has this list of 1,000 components that the British Army can't actually buy anymore because the manufacturers have stopped producing them. And so what they're doing is they're trying to recreate some of these components themselves using the 3D printers so they can get vehicles that have broken down because of silly reasons like plastic clips no longer work, and they can get them going back on the road. And obviously this is going to be vital in a war scenario where vehicles will often break down or be damaged, and they'll need to create these 3D parts to get them back at the front line as soon as possible.
And in terms of the opportunities this presents, Larisa, does it enable the Army to use vehicles maybe that have been retired from active service because suddenly you can find replacement parts or manufacture replacement parts for them again?
Yes, that's exactly what they're able to do. So one soldier was telling me how they've got tanks, for example, Challenger tanks based at Senelager that have been effectively mothballed, and now they'll be able to bring them out. And they want to bring these tanks out for things like Exercise Steadfast Defender. But of course, they may be missing some components, or they may not be working effectively. And by having this 3D printing technology, they're able to build those components themselves. And one of the major problems is obviously that all these companies that might have existed decades ago aren't producing these parts anymore. So yes, as they bring out these potentially retired vehicles or vehicles that they didn't expect to use anytime soon, they need those parts and they can't find them anywhere else.
And tell us about this unit, because it's a new Army unit. Where did they learn some of these techniques?
Yeah, they're the newest Army unit. They were telling me, I was speaking to a couple of different soldiers, and they were telling me how vital YouTube had been. One of them was saying that he just kept on watching videos to see how to sort of perfect the 3D printing process. Another one was telling me that he was just a 3D printing enthusiast. He'd bought his own 3D printer and was producing toys for his nieces and nephews and gifts for his wife. So he sort of got really into it then, and then he was recruited to join 9 Battalion.
So put this into context for us. Could this be a game changer?
I think it's a really important piece of kit, actually. I was having a briefing with some security contacts, and they were telling me that Russia was really struggling with its war in Ukraine because they weren't able to replace a lot of the components that were needed to keep tanks and armoured vehicles working. and as a result, they were sending these vehicles into battle without necessary kit, without the sort of sophisticated things that they needed to actually work effectively. And whereas the British Army have obviously come up with quite an interesting solution, and I think if they can really upscale it and get more of these printers and things printed much faster than they are at the moment, then it could be a game changer, I think.
You mentioned Ukraine. Could this be used to help the Ukrainians?
So the Ukrainians have been given some of these printers. They're not quite at the stage where they could move these printers to the front line quickly. The British have managed to adapt these printers to make them more accessible for the military. However, the Ukrainians have got them, and they are using them to produce basic components that they will need. So yeah, they're already in use.
How long do you think it'll be until other countries have similar technology they're able to use?
I think the key here is that other countries are obviously already looking at 3D printing. You've already had Formula One use 3D printers, but the British military is the first military that's used these 3D printers on a NATO exercise, and also have adapted them so they can be sent in a shipping container on a truck to a front line, basically. So I think that other countries will probably catch up quite quickly.
And I assume that given the UK's membership of NATO, there'll be a lot of cooperation here and maybe sharing of this technology. Would that happen among NATO members?
Yeah, and they've been showing NATO members over the last few weeks how they've been using these 3D printers. They're currently on exercise Steadfast Defender, which is the largest NATO exercise since the end of the Cold War. And these printers are being used for that purpose, to make sure that kit's ready and able to be used as part of the exercise. So yes, I think that they want to work with NATO to be able to develop the technology further.
In the longer term, how else might 3D printing technology be used? Is it feasible that in the years to come, weapons will be 3D printed?
I asked them about weapons. I sort of said, what are your aspirations for the future? And I know that obviously criminal gangs are being able to build 3D guns. The British Army said that they wouldn't be doing that, though, because they wouldn't be able to rely upon them. They'd end up like shooting themselves if they were relying on 3D printed weapons. So no, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
And it's interesting that you said that a lot of this unit actually learned some of these techniques off YouTube. It's interesting how relatively low-tech technology can actually be incredibly effective. We've seen in the war in Ukraine how commercial drones have been adapted by the Ukrainians and used to great effect on the front line.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is a fairly, what seemed to me anyway, as a fairly complex process in that sense. However, they're, within a few hours, they're able to produce some really quite basic kit, and you just see how actually vital some of that basic equipment is. I mean, one of the things that they were telling me about is they've got doors, for example, that would normally cost £600 to replace on trucks, and they have to replace them because they can't just buy a plastic component, a small plastic component, and now they're able to develop the plastic component for 50p, which saves them the £600 that they'd otherwise need to buy the door.